The introductions always went the same way. We'd gather in someone's living room, holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, and one by one, my cousins would be announced like achievements. This is Daniel. He's a senior manager now. This is Priya. She just made partner. This is Michael, director level. Each title landed with a small, satisfied pause. Then the attention drifted toward me. And this is... Someone would hesitate. Well, she's doing her own thing. I smiled. That pause told people everything they thought they needed to know. And that's when the familiar thought surfaced. Calm, steady, unchanged. They didn't know what I had already done. My cousins loved their titles. They wore them like armor. They spoke about work the way people speak about medals. Carefully, proudly, always hoping someone would ask for more detail. And people did. They asked about promotions. About teams managed. About corner offices and travel perks. No one asked me anything beyond polite curiosity. What do you do? How's that going? Still working for yourself? I answered briefly. Vaguely. Because titles make people listen, but assets make people quiet. At dinner, Daniel leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink. It's exhausting, he said loudly. The responsibility never ends. Everyone nodded sympathetically. I took a sip of water. Worth it though, Priya added. Not everyone can handle that level. Their eyes flicked toward me. Just briefly. I smiled again. I used to care about that moment. The subtle comparison. The unspoken assumption that I'd opted out because I couldn't opt in. But that was before I learned something important. People who talk about titles usually need them to be seen. People who build assets don't. My mother once asked me why I never corrected anyone. Why don't you tell them what you actually do? She said. I shrugged. Because then they'd start asking questions, I replied. And, she pressed. And I'd lose the advantage of being underestimated. She frowned. She didn't understand that yet. The truth was, while my cousins were climbing ladders, I was building floors. Slowly. Quietly. Without applause. I didn't announce milestones. Didn't update LinkedIn. Didn't explain why my time was suddenly more flexible than theirs, or why I never seemed stressed on Sunday nights. At family gatherings, the jokes started gently. So when are you getting a real title? Michael asked once, grinning. I laughed. When I need one, I said. That answer confused him. People don't like answers that don't fit their framework. What they didn't see were the spreadsheets. The contracts. The ownership percentages that ticked upward while they slept. They measured success in syllables printed on business cards. I measured it in things that worked even when I wasn't there. One afternoon, Priya pulled me aside. I worry about you, she said softly. You're so capable. You could do more. I nodded politely. I am, I replied. She smiled indulgently. That's not what I meant. I knew. The first asset I built wasn't impressive. Not outwardly. No one would have bragged about it at a dinner table. But it paid me quietly. Reliably. Enough to fund the next one. And then the next. Like bricks stacked behind a wall no one bothered to look at. My cousins chased visibility. I chased insulation. They needed their companies to survive. My assets didn't need permission. At the next holiday dinner, Daniel announced another promotion. Applause. Admiration. Questions. Then someone turned to me. And you? They asked. I smiled. I'm comfortable, I said. The room went oddly quiet. Comfort isn't impressive. Until people realize what it implies. Later that night, as I drove home, I thought about the irony of it all. They wore their worth on their sleeves. I carried mine silently. And one day, not yet but soon, the difference would stop being theoretical. Because titles disappear when companies restructure. But assets. Assets speak long after introductions stop. The higher my cousins climbed, the louder the comparisons became. Not directly. Never openly cruel. Just constant. Unavoidable. At brunch, Daniel talked about managing a team twice the size of last year's. More people, more pressure, he said, rubbing his temples like a badge of honor. But that's leadership. Priya nodded. You don't get to our level without sacrifice. Their eyes slid toward me again. That quiet check-in. And what exactly do you sacrifice? I buttered my toast and smiled. They like to frame their lives as difficult in important ways. Long hours. High stakes. Constant performance. And to be fair, it was hard. But it was also fragile. Because everything they bragged about could be taken away by a single email. They never liked that thought. So they never entertained it. Michael cornered me once near the coffee machine. You ever worry you're wasting your potential? He asked. It sounded sincere. It wasn't. It was a comparison dressed as concern. I used to, I said honestly. And now? He pressed. Now I worry about wasting my time, I replied. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. They assumed my calm meant stagnation. My flexibility meant lack of ambition. When I declined a family trip because I had work, they smirked. What work? Daniel joked. I didn't answer. Because explaining revenue streams to people who measure success by org charts is like describing color to someone committed to black and white. Behind the scenes, my days were precise. Mornings for review. Afternoons for decisions. Evenings left untouched. My assets didn't demand my presence, just my attention. That difference mattered. The second asset changed everything. Not because it was large. Because it overlapped. Suddenly, money flowed from one thing into another without passing through me. I noticed it one night while reconciling accounts. I wasn't the engine anymore. I was the architect. That realization stayed with me. Quietly. At the next family gathering, Priya mentioned burnout. I'm exhausted, she said. But you can't slow down at this level. I nodded sympathetically. What happens if you do? I asked. She frowned. You don't, she said. Exactly. The jokes shifted after that. Less playful. Sharper. So, Daniel said once, still enjoying your freedom? I smiled. Yes, I replied. Must be nice, he muttered. It wasn't envy yet. But it was adjacent. What they didn't realize was how often they were part of my spreadsheets. Not directly, but structurally. The industries they worked in. The services their companies relied on. The buildings they occupied. I noticed patterns they never had time to see. Because they were busy being impressive. One evening, my mother asked me something unexpected. Do they know? She asked. Know what? I replied. She hesitated. That you're secure. I thought about it. No, I said. They know I'm untitled. She sighed. Does that bother you? I shook my head. It protects me. The third asset took longer. More patience. More restraint. I passed on opportunities my cousins would have bragged about immediately. I waited. And waiting is invisible work. People assume nothing is happening when they can't see motion. That assumption has funded more quiet fortunes than ambition ever has. At dinner, Michael announced another promotion. This one came with stock options. Everyone congratulated him. I did too. Because I meant it. But as he talked, I noticed something else. His voice carried relief, not pride. Like someone who'd outrun something chasing him. Not someone building toward something. Later that night, as we stood by the door, he lowered his voice. You're lucky, he said. I met his eyes. No, I replied. I'm insulated. He didn't understand the difference. Not yet. Driving home, I thought about how much energy goes into appearances, how many hours they spent staying visible, and how little time that left for ownership. My assets didn't care if anyone noticed them. They worked in silence, which meant I could too. What I didn't realize then was how soon the comparison would flip, how quickly titles would stop impressing when pressure arrived, and how suddenly my lack of one would become confusing, because the moment something went wrong in their world, they'd start looking for stability. And stability doesn't introduce itself with a title. It reveals itself when everything else starts shaking. The first crack didn't make a sound. It arrived as a calendar update. Daniel's promotion dinner was quietly postponed. No explanation. No rescheduled date. Just a polite message about timing. At the next family gathering, no one mentioned it. Except Daniel. Too casually. "They're restructuring," he said, waving it off. "Totally normal at this level." I nodded. Restructuring is the corporate word for wait and see who survives. A few weeks later, Michael stopped bragging. That was harder to miss. The man who once narrated every step of his ascent now spoke in half sentences. "Things are fluid," he said when someone asked about work. Fluid is what people say when certainty evaporates. Priya was the last to show strain. She always was. Her title had weight. Her firm had prestige. Until one Sunday afternoon, when she pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. I nodded. "What would you do," she asked, "if everything you built depended on a structure you didn't control?" I looked at her carefully. "I wouldn't build that way," I replied. She frowned. I didn't think I did either. That was the moment. The shift. When the room stopped seeing me as the outlier and started seeing me as different. Not superior. Unsettling. Daniel called me 2 days later. That never happened. "Hey," he said, voice too bright. "Random question." I waited. "You still invest, right?" he asked. I smiled to myself. "I own," I replied. There was a pause. "Oh," he said. "Right. Ownership doesn't sound impressive until it becomes relevant." He didn't explain why he was asking. He didn't have to. Titles had stopped cushioning him. And for the first time, he was noticing that mine hadn't been doing that work at all. At the next dinner, the dynamic was unmistakable. Michael checked his phone constantly. Priya drank water instead of wine. Daniel laughed too loudly. And suddenly, no one asked about titles. They asked about stability. "How's the market? Are things slowing down for you? Are you affected?" I answered honestly. No. That word landed heavier than any title ever had. My mother noticed immediately. Later, as we cleared dishes, she leaned in. "They're looking at you differently," she whispered. I nodded. "They always were," I said. "They just didn't realize it." Michael cornered me near the door. "Be honest," he said. "How exposed are you?" I met his eyes. "Enough to stay awake," I said. "Not enough to panic." He nodded slowly. That answer stayed with him. The truth was, my assets weren't immune. They were designed. Designed to bend. To pause. To outlast noise. I had built them assuming disruption, not denying it. My cousins had built careers assuming continuity. And continuity had just blinked. A week later, Priya called me late at night. "I can't sleep," she admitted. I listened. "They've changed the rules," she said. "And I don't know how to move without breaking something." I chose my words carefully. "That's what happens when your value is rented," I said softly. "Not owned." She didn't argue. She couldn't. What I didn't say, what I didn't need to, was that I'd been preparing for this kind of moment for years. Not for their downfall. For my independence. But when people build on titles, they don't believe in gravity. They believe in momentum. And momentum always runs out first. At the next family event, someone introduced Daniel differently. "This is my nephew," they said. "He works in corporate." No title. No pause. Just a description. Daniel smiled politely. I saw it then. The thing titles hide from you until it's too late. They don't just elevate you. They make you forget who you are without them. Later that night, as I drove home, I thought about how quietly the balance had shifted. No announcements. No confrontations. Just the slow realization that while they were busy protecting their positions, I had been building something that didn't need one. And now, for the first time, they could feel the difference. The questions didn't come all at once. They never do. They arrived carefully, softly, like people afraid of what the answers might reveal. Daniel started first. He texted me late one evening. "Quick question, you still diversifying, or mostly hands-off these days?" I stared at the message. Not because I was surprised. Because of the word he chose. Diversifying. That wasn't his language before. That was fear learning new vocabulary. "I'm deliberate," I replied. There was a pause before the typing bubble appeared again. "Must be nice," he wrote. I didn't respond. Nice is what people call stability when they're realizing they don't have it. Michael followed a week later. He asked to meet for coffee. In person. That alone told me everything. The man who once bragged about back-to-back meetings suddenly had time. We sat across from each other, the noise of the cafe filling the silence he didn't know how to break. "So," he said finally, "how liquid are you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" I asked. He laughed nervously. "Just curious. Curiosity doesn't fidget. Concern does." "I don't build for liquidity," I said calmly. "I build for continuity." He nodded slowly. That answer didn't reassure him. It unsettled him. Because continuity isn't something you can ask for once things shake. It's something you either planned for, or didn't. Priya was last. She always was. She waited until the conversation felt unavoidable. We were alone in the kitchen again, like before, but the tone had changed. "What do you actually own?" she asked. No judgment. No pride. Just need. I didn't list anything. I didn't have to. "Enough," I said. She leaned against the counter, exhaling. "I thought titles meant control," she said quietly. "They mean access," I replied. "Control comes later, if at all." She nodded. Like something heavy had finally landed. At the next family gathering, no one boasted. That alone was startling. Instead, conversations drifted toward options. Backup plans. Side projects. Exit strategies. Words they'd never needed before. They asked me questions without asking me questions. "What do you think about real estate now? Is it still risky to own outright? Would you ever go back to corporate?" I answered each one plainly. "No, depends on the structure." I never left. That last one confused them. My mother watched the shift closely. Later she whispered, "They're seeking your approval." I shook my head. "No," I said. "They're seeking permission to feel safe." There's a difference. Daniel pulled me aside after dinner. "I underestimated you," he said. I studied his face. Tired. Uncertain. Human. "Yes," I replied. He winced. "You don't have to say it like that," he muttered. "I do," I said gently. "So you don't forget." He nodded. That was new too. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, my lack of a title made me invisible. Now, my lack of one made me interesting. Not impressive. Reliable. And reliability is what people reach for when the room stops clapping. Michael asked if he could pick my brain. I declined politely. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. I wasn't interested in becoming a consultant for people who ignored me until gravity showed up. Priya surprised me. I wish I'd asked sooner, she said. So do I replied. We shared a quiet moment. No competition. Just recognition. That night, alone, I reviewed my assets. Not obsessively. Not proudly. Just enough to confirm what I already knew. They were doing exactly what they were designed to do. Working without witnesses. What I didn't realize then was that the questions were only the beginning. Because questions lead to requests. And requests reveal expectations. And expectations, once unmet, force people to confront something uncomfortable. That not all success is transferable. And not all wisdom comes with a title. Soon, they wouldn't just want to understand how I built what I had. They'd want to know if I could share it. And that would be the moment I'd have to decide something for myself. Not about money. About boundaries. The first request didn't sound like a request. It never does. It arrived wrapped in humility, softened by praise, cushioned with nostalgia. Daniel invited me to lunch. Not coffee. Not a quick catch-up. Lunch. That was new. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, he began, barely touching his food. About ownership. I nodded, letting him talk. You've always been strategic, he continued. I guess I didn't see it. I didn't correct him. People don't apologize to be corrected. They apologize to be relieved. He cleared his throat. I might have an opportunity, he said. A transition, really. There it was. I'm listening, I replied. Well, he said carefully, I'm considering stepping back. Starting something smaller. Independent. I waited. And I thought, he added, maybe you'd want a partner. Or advise. You've clearly built something that works. Partner. Advise. Words chosen to sound equal. They weren't. I don't do partnerships lightly, I said. I wouldn't expect you to, he replied quickly. Just guidance. A bridge. A bridge. From where he was standing to where he thought I lived. Michael came next. He didn't dress it up. I need a buffer, he said over the phone. Just until things stabilize. Buffer from what? I asked. Volatility, he replied. I closed my eyes. Volatility is what people call risk once it starts charging interest. Priya waited the longest. She always did. When she finally spoke, it wasn't about money. It was about fear. I don't know how to rebuild without losing face, she admitted. That was honest. Too honest to ignore. I listened to all of them. Separately. Carefully. Without promising anything. And after each conversation, I noticed the same thing. None of them asked how I built what I had. They asked what it could do for them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was tempted. Because I was clear. This was the moment assets reveal their second function. They don't just provide stability. They attract expectation. My mother called the next morning. I heard Daniel had lunch with you, she said. Yes, I replied. She paused. They're leaning on you, she said. I know. She hesitated. Are you going to help them? I thought about it. About the years of dismissal. The jokes. The silence. I'm going to be fair, I said. She exhaled. That sounds measured. It is, I replied. Fairness isn't generosity. And generosity without boundaries becomes obligation. I'd learned that watching people confuse titles with entitlement. I met Daniel again. This time, I spoke first. I won't carry risk that isn't mine, I said calmly. And I won't fund learning curves. He nodded slowly. That makes sense, he said. It didn't. Not to him. Michael pushed harder. You're in a position to help, he said. Family helps family. I met his gaze. Family also respects time, I replied. He didn't have an answer for that. Priya surprised me. She didn't ask for money. She asked for perspective. What would you do if you were me? She asked. I considered it. I'd stop trying to replace the title, I said, and start building something that doesn't need one. She nodded. That conversation changed her. The others. They were still negotiating. What they didn't understand was this. I wasn't protecting my assets from them. I was protecting myself from repeating an old pattern. The one where my value only became visible when it was needed. A week later, Daniel sent a proposal. Formal. Polished. Optimistic. I read it once. Then closed it. Because it assumed something fundamental. That I wanted to be visible now. That I wanted to convert my quiet work into public alignment. I didn't. I replied with one sentence. I'm not available for this. No explanation. No apology. The fallout was subtle. A little distance. A little disappointment. A little wounded pride. But also something else. Respect. The reluctant kind. The kind that arrives when people realize they can't lean. What I didn't realize then was how important this refusal would be. Because it wasn't about denying help. It was about refusing to let my work be reframed as a safety net for other people's shortcuts. Titles teach you to seek approval upward. Assets teach you to protect what's already working. And that night, as I reviewed my portfolio one last time before bed, I felt something solid settle in my chest. Not power. Alignment. The next act wouldn't be loud. It never was. But it would be final. Because once you say no without guilt, something shifts permanently. And my cousins were about to understand something they never learned from their titles. That not all success is meant to be shared. Some of it is meant to be defended. The distance didn't arrive with anger. That would have been easier. It arrived with recalibration. Fewer messages. Shorter replies. Invitations that felt optional instead of assumed. Boundaries don't announce themselves. They change the temperature. Daniel stopped updating me. Not out of spite, out of pride. I heard through someone else that he'd taken a temporary role while exploring options. Temporary is what titles become when they no longer protect you. He didn't ask for my opinion again. That told me he was still measuring value in the wrong units. Michael tried one last time. A text. Carefully worded. Just wanted to say I respect your decision. No pressure. I read it twice. Then replied. I know. That was all. Because reassurance is not something you owe people who only seek it when they're unsure. Priya changed the most. Not outwardly. Internally. She stopped defending her title in conversations. Stopped framing her exhaustion as virtue. The next time we spoke, she said something that stayed with me. I realized I don't actually own anything, she said. I waited. I just rent my certainty, she added. That awareness cost her more than money ever could. At the next family gathering, the dynamic had settled into something new. Not admiration. Not resentment. Acceptance. No one asked what I was doing. They asked how I was. That distinction mattered. My mother noticed too. You're not orbiting them anymore, she said quietly as we washed dishes. No, I replied. I never was. She smiled. They thought you were. I know. The hardest part wasn't the separation. It was resisting the urge to soften it. To explain myself. To smooth over discomfort. But clarity doesn't negotiate. And independence doesn't apologize. Daniel ran into trouble 6 months later. Not catastrophic. But real. His new venture stalled. The confidence he'd borrowed from his title didn't transfer. He called me once. Just once. I get it now, he said. I believed him. But understanding doesn't entitle access. Michael pivoted again. Chasing something shinier. Something louder. He needed momentum the way some people need noise. That was his lesson to learn, not mine to interrupt. Priya started building. Quietly. She didn't tell anyone. Didn't announce it. She asked me one question months later. How did you stand being invisible for so long? I smiled. I wasn't invisible, I said. I was unavailable. She nodded. That answer landed. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I had no title, they dismissed me. When I had no obligation, they respected me. Because independence unsettles people who mistake access for closeness. My assets kept working. Unimpressed by family dynamics. Unmoved by pride. They didn't care who approved of them. They didn't care who understood them. They only cared that I maintained them. One evening, my mother said something I hadn't expected. I used to worry you weren't ambitious enough, she admitted. I raised an eyebrow. And now? I asked. She smiled. Now I see you just weren't loud. That night, alone, I thought about how titles train you to wait. Wait for permission. Wait for recognition. Wait for the next rung. Assets train you to decide. And decision-making changes how people relate to you, especially those who are used to being deferred to. The distance between me and my cousins wasn't cruel. It was accurate. It reflected the truth that we were no longer building the same kind of lives. They were still negotiating position. I had moved on to permanence. What I didn't realize then was that this distance wasn't the ending. It was the settling. The moment where everything found its rightful place. No hierarchy. No competition. Just alignment. Because when you stop needing titles to validate you, and stop needing approval to move, the people who once looked down on you no longer know where to stand. And that confusion. That's not revenge. That's consequence. The funny thing about assets is that they never introduce themselves. They don't shake hands. They don't list credentials. They don't ask for recognition. They just work. And over time, that work becomes impossible to ignore. Years later, the family gatherings feel different. Quieter. Not tense. Settled. No one announces promotions anymore. No one compares trajectories. We talk about weather. About health. About ordinary things. That's how I know the competition is over. My cousins still have titles. Some new. Some recycled. Some worn lightly now. They don't brag about them. They've learned something the hard way. Titles are rented confidence. Assets are owned calm. I still don't have a title people understand. I never corrected that. I never needed to. Because the things I built don't require explanation. They show up in how I move. In the choices I make without asking anyone's permission. In the way my time belongs to me. Once, at a dinner, someone asked me what I did. Not a cousin. An outsider. Before I could answer, Priya spoke. She builds things that last, she said. That was enough. Later that night, my mother smiled at me across the table. Not the worried smile she used to have. A peaceful one. The kind that says I see it now. I didn't build assets to prove my cousins wrong. I built them because I wanted independence that didn't expire. Because I wanted stability that didn't depend on someone else's boardroom. Because I understood something titles never teach you. Visibility is optional. Ownership is not. The difference between us isn't intelligence. Or effort. Or even ambition. It's where we placed our faith. They placed theirs in structures that rewarded loyalty. I placed mine in systems that rewarded patience. Sometimes, people still assume I'm between things. I let them. Because being underestimated is still useful. Even now. Especially now. If there's a lesson in all of this, it isn't that titles are bad. They serve a purpose. They open doors. They create momentum. But they don't hold weight when the ground shifts. Assets do. I don't talk about what I own. I don't list achievements. I don't explain why I never seem rushed. Because the strongest proof of success isn't what you say. It's what you don't have to say. And that's the irony. While my cousins were busy being introduced by titles, everything I built was introducing itself. Quietly. Reliably. Without needing a name. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.